I'm Brad Wolf, and welcome to Dire Den. This is part 5 in the How to Build a Better D&D Sandbox series. And so far, we have combined 4 Dungeons & Dragons adventures into one big gameable sandbox. In the Sunless Citadel adventure, we have Belak, the outcast druid, who is basically Poison Ivy from DC Comics, who is trying to take over the world with evil plant creatures. The only difference is they make Belak a guy so he can be a mustache-twirling villain. And in the original adventure, Belak is using the heart of a vampire to make his evil blights, these plant creatures. But in order to connect this to the other adventures, I replaced the heart of the vampire with a shard from a Shattered Obelisk. And you'll see how that connects the dots later. Then there's the Forge of Fury adventure, which is basically a 4-story monster hotel. On the top level, you have orcs being led by an ogre king. The next level is home to a bunch of troglodytes. Then there's a level with a bunch of Duergar and a magic forge. And lastly, you have a black dragon. In the original adventure, there's not much of a cohesive story to this dungeon, but I'm focused on the Duergar and their magic forge that's capable of making magical items. And again, we'll come back to that in a minute. Next, we have the Shattered Obelisk adventure and the main villains Glassstaff the Wizard and the Spider. And they have 2 groups working for them, the Cragmaw Goblinoids and some would-be mercenaries called the Red Band Ruffians. Now, they are also looking for a magical forge in Wave Echo Cave. And now you can see how I'm connecting the dots. Then, in the second half of the Shattered Obelisk adventure, we have 3 Mind Flayers with a master plan of creating a new Mind Flayer society. And they have enlisted the help of some goblins and given them psychic powers. The 4th adventure is Dragons of Icefire Peak, and their main villain is a group of orcs who've been displaced from the mountains because of a white dragon. And these orcs are being led by evil priests who worship the thunder god Talos. The other thing that's super useful about this adventure is it's already a sandbox with several short adventures that help stitch together the larger adventures. So I combine the orcs from Dragons of Icefire Peak with the orcs from Forge of Fury. And this helps generate a purpose for why the orcs are invading that Forge of Fury dungeon. And that helps create an overall story. Then to flesh out the rest of the story, we combine Glassstaff and the Spider with the Duergar because they're all searching for magical forges. And then we connect them even further by saying that they have one of the shards of the Shattered Obelisk, and they're using it to control the Black Dragon. So now there's a whole group of villains combined into one faction, and they are directly opposed to the Mind Flayer faction because the Mind Flayers want all of the shards of the Shattered Obelisk because they want to use the rebuilt obelisk to summon their new god to the material plane and create a whole new Mind Flayer civilization here on the material plane. So what you're about to see is me finishing my campaign notes as I work through my campaign prep process. Alright, so let's go down to our 10 tense conflicts, and I've laid out our 4 factions here. We've got the Mind Flayers who want all the obelisks and are turning people into Mind Flayers. They basically hope that using the obelisk, they'll be able to turn multiple people at a time into Mind Flayers instead of turning them into one at a time with the little slug things that go into your eyeball and change your, and mutate your brain. So they are going to be in conflict with the ogres and the orcs because they are in the way. The Mind Flayers would have been completely happy for the ogres and the orcs to just stay in the mountains and stay out of the way. But now that they've come down from the mountains, they're messing with the Mind Flayers' prey, which are all the people in all the towns that the Mind Flayers are trying to turn into other Mind Flayers. Now, the Mind Flayers are at odds with Glassstaff and the Spider because they have one of the shards. Glassstaff and the Spider are using one of the shards to control the Black Dragon. So they want the shard that is controlling the dragon because they're trying to get all the shards. So lastly, they want the shard that the druid has, which of course puts them in conflict with Belak the druid. So once the shard that is in Belak's tree. Okay, so that brings us to our ogres and orcs. And they just want a place to live. Displaced by the dragon. The white dragon. So they were perfectly happy staying in the mountains until a giant white dragon came along and, took their home. So they are now trying to just find a place to live. That's their main goal. And so they're essentially just in everyone's way. So they are basically just in everyone's way. Players might be able to find a peaceful solution to this if they just go kill the white dragon and let the orcs go back to their home. Or the players could eliminate the evil priests that are in charge of the orcs right now and then reach a peaceful settlement and find the orcs a nice plot of land to live on. So next we have Glassstaff and the Spider and the Dwergar, and they are just searching for these magical forges. There's one from the original Pandelver adventure in Wave Echo Cave, and there's another one at the bottom of the Forge of Fury dungeon. I keep wanting to call it Fury Forge, which would be a shorter, easier name to remember, but no, it's Forge of Fury. So, there you go. That connects two of our adventures because now we give this group of villains the goal of getting access to both of those forges. So now that puts them at odds with the orcs. They are against the orcs because the orcs are moving. They're moving into the Fury Forge dungeon, the Forge of Fury dungeon. So their plan was going perfectly well. The Dwergar had mined down underneath the troglodytes who were living there, and the Dwergar had gotten access to the old dwarven ruins there, and they had found the forge. But now the orcs show up because they're looking for a new home, and they start to invade the dungeon, and that messes up their plans. So now our former adventurers turned villains are at odds with the orcs. They are also at odds with the Mind Flayers because Glassstaff and the Spider and the Dwergar are currently using a shard from a Shattered Obelisk to control the mind of the dragon. And the Mind Flayers want that shard. So that's going to basically take away their dragon. And they don't want that. So that's going to create conflict between these guys and the Mind Flayers. And there's not really a major conflict between the Glassstaff and the Spider and the Druid because they're on opposite ends of the map. However, their main reason for getting these forges is so they can sell magic weapons. And in order to sell weapons, you have to have a place to sell them. So I'm going to say protect civilization from the Druid. Now, while I'm doing this, if anybody is commenting on how slowly I type, just be aware that I only type with one hand because the other hand doesn't really work that well. All right, so let's get down to the last one here, the Druid. So his main conflict is he wants to overthrow civilization and turn everything into plants. Plant people and just forest everywhere. Destroy the cities, destroy the villages, just overgrow everything. So I kind of feel like maybe he would be okay with the orcs making a mess of things. But eventually, he would want the orcs out of the way. So he's willing to manipulate the orcs, but again, only temporary. He's willing for them to make a mess of things, but that's only because he wants everything out of his way. He definitely is against Mind Flayer civilization. Because he doesn't want any civilization. Yeah, so he's definitely against the Mind Flayers because the Mind Flayers are trying to make a new Mind Flayer civilization. And his whole goal is he doesn't want any civilization. And if he's left unchecked, he's just going to march all the way down to Phandalin with all his plant monsters. And this essentially means that Glassstaff and the Spider are in his way. So actually, this is not the best example of 10 conflicts for a campaign. If I was doing this for a homebrew campaign, these conflicts would probably be a little more interesting. Definitely would be a little more interesting. But these are the villains I'm working with from the adventures, and I don't want to change the adventures significantly because I do want my players to feel like they have played these adventures and not just another homebrew game of mine. So while I'm making some changes, I'm not changing them drastically. The important thing here is you really don't need a lot of elaborate ideas for these conflicts, but you just need the conflicts in place. So whatever your players don't deal with, the world keeps churning and moving forward. And these villains are going to keep doing their thing, and that's going to keep causing consequences for the world. So if your players ignore one thing, then another thing gets worse, and that creates dramatic tension. So there you have it. All 5 of my steps have been covered. Let me scroll all the way up to the top. Now, we didn't really pick 2 simple locations because we're using 4 adventures and we have a ton of locations to choose from. But what I will do is after session 0, I will prep 2 locations. I'll prep the starting location that my players choose during session 0, and I'll prep the dungeon that goes with that. There's no way to prep like 40 different locations across 4 different adventures. So prepping 2 locations at a time is plenty. And next we have the 4 feuding factions. We know what those 4 factions are, and we have at least 3 of them fully fleshed out. The 4th one is kind of in waiting to see how high a level the players get before they encounter that 4th faction. Then we have our 6 eccentric NPCs, so we're good to go there. We have our 8 magical oddities, and you just saw me put together the 10 tense conflicts. And those are the 5 steps of campaign prep. And then what we'll do is after I do my session 0 with my players, I'm going to come back with another video to report on how that session went. And then we're going to get into session prep as I prepare the individual sessions for the campaign. And that's a series that could go on for as long as this campaign goes if you guys enjoy me doing that. Otherwise, I'll do a few just to show you how I prep sessions. But if you want to see me keep going as we get into it and you want to see the whole campaign and get the campaign reports after the session and then see what I do in response to what the players did as I prep the next session, we can lay that out in a whole series of videos. I think I would have fun doing it as long as you guys are going to have fun watching it. So let me know. But as always, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time in the Dire Den.